Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock here, so we're going to get started. I know there's probably going to be a few people still filtering in. So I wanted to start out saying thank you for joining us today for the Common Turning Point Questions webinar. We did receive quite a few questions from you, so we will be going over some of those today. My name is Derek Abram. I'm one of the trainers here at Turning Technologies Canada. Chances are, at some point in the past, most of you have talked to me in some capacity, whether it's support, training, from the sales side of things. So I see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list, so that's great to see. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days to come in and learn some more about Turning Point. We do have, like I said, some questions that have been submitted ahead of time. So I do have those set up in this presentation ready to go over with everybody. If you have a question that you did not submit prior to the webinar, feel free to do so during, and I'll do my best to get to them. Anything that I don't get to during the webinar today, what I'll do is I'll put together a PDF with the answer to those questions, and I'll send that out to all the registered members of this particular session. It's also being recorded, so following the session I will be posting probably tomorrow a link to the recording so that you can share it amongst your team members and review it if you need to. Okay, so with that said, we'll get started here. And let's have a look at the very first question. Now, the questions, I've kind of placed them in order of, hardware, software, so I've tried to keep similar questions together. They're not in any particular order in those categories, so we'll just kind of start going through them together here. One of the common questions, kind of the first common question that we get is, do I need an internet connection in order to use this technology? The answer to that is yes and no. It all depends on what you're doing with Turning Point. In its default form, if you're just using your USB receiver and your keypads, those two devices, they communicate through an RF technology. So as far as that goes, you don't need any sort of internet connection or connectivity for that to work. The only thing you would need an internet connection for is to originally download and install the Turning Point software. Once the software's on your system, you're good to go. You don't need to worry about a web connection of any sort. Now, if you're using our web polling technology, which is called ResponseWare, you will require an internet connection for that to function. So both the presenter's computer that is running the presentation needs to have a web connection, and then your participants need to have a web connection of some sort. So whether they're on an internal wireless network, whether they're on their cellular data plan, they just need to have some way of connecting to the internet. So if you're doing web polling, yes, you will need an internet connection. If you're just doing standard keypad-based polling, then no, you don't need to worry about an internet connection at all. Okay, let's look at the next question. Can I test my presentation without having the hardware in my possession? Believe it or not, this is a question that we do get fairly frequently. The challenge that we see from our side a lot of times, and I'm sure some of you out there have the same sort of challenge, is you may only have one kit or two kits or three kits of keypads and receivers, and so the challenge becomes, as other departments or other individuals are using that technology, you may still need to build a presentation. You still may want to test a presentation. And so from my experiences, a lot of people don't know that you don't actually have the hardware, you don't need to have the hardware with you in order to build your presentation and test it. I'm just going to jump out of my presentation mode really quick here just to kind of show you in a nutshell how you can actually go ahead and test your presentation. So I've got my Turning Point toolbar here within PowerPoint, and you'll notice in the top sort of center of that Turning Point toolbar, on my screen right now it says simulated polling. By default, that will say live polling. So Turning Point always assumes that you've got your receiver and keypads with you. Now, if you're working on a presentation at home, if somebody else has your equipment, like I said earlier, by just changing this drop-down over to simulated polling, what that's doing is it's telling Turning Point, you know what, hey, I don't have my hardware here. let's just drop 30 random responses into each question. And so it's a very quick, very easy way to go through and build and test your presentation as you go. One of the things we always recommend is, make sure you test your presentation, review it, make sure you're comfortable with it. And so by being able to use that simulated mode, it makes it very easy to do that. One piece of information I will pass along is that if you notice something not working properly while you're in simulated polling mode and you're testing your presentation, don't just chalk that up to it's simulated polling mode. When I'm live tomorrow or next week, it'll be okay. Whether you're in simulated or live polling mode, your presentation is going to behave exactly the same way. Okay, so if something's not quite right while you're testing it, whatever that thing was that's not quite right is still going to be not quite right during your live presentation. Okay. Let me just see here. It looks like we might have a couple. Somebody's just asked if I can make the audio any louder. I've got my audio turned up as loud as I can on my mic. The video, the recording of it when it comes through may be better afterwards if you're having trouble hearing some of the stuff that I'm saying. I'll try to speak a little bit louder though. We'll see how it goes from here on out. Okay, here's another common question. How do I turn my response card on? This is generally something that when we're doing conferences and different events with our clients, we'll have participants from the audience, kind of grabbing us and saying, hey, do I have to do anything with this to turn it on? As a lot of you probably know, as far as the keypads go, there's nothing that you need to do in terms of turning them on. There's no on-off switch or anything like that. What your keypads are going to do is while they're sitting, whether it's on a table, chair, in the participant's hand, the keypad is essentially sleeping. And so what happens is when the participant pushes a button to answer the question, the keypad turns on for that 2 or 3 second period just to send that response, get a confirmation back from the presenter's computer saying response was accepted and it was valid, and then it goes back to sleep. So as far as that sort of stuff goes, literally just hand the keypads out. It's plug and play. You don't need to worry about jumping through any hoops or activations or anything like that when you're using the keypads. Let's see what the next question is. Our presenter card. Many of you have started to receive the presenter card as part of your kit, whether it was a pre-built bundle that you purchased from us, whether it was an after-the-fact purchase where you said, hey, I saw this really cool presenter card, how can I get one? A really common question that we've been getting about this particular device is, do I need to do something to get it to work? Because generally we're comfortable with taking our presenter cue, plugging the receiver in, and it just works, right? We don't have to do anything special or fancy. The presenter card is a little bit different. It sort of pairs to your computer like your cell phone does to the hands-free setup in your car or your Bluetooth headset. You can imagine if anybody could walk into any room with a presenter card and start controlling that presentation, you can imagine the havoc that we would have on our hands. So what we've done is we've introduced a pairing system for the presenter card. And so what you're going to do is you're only going to have one presenter card at a time paired to your computer. And so any computer that you use for presenting, you're going to want to make sure your presenter card is paired to it. Now I'm just going to jump out of my presentation mode here and I'm going to show you quickly here how to pair your presenter card. So what we're going to do is on the TurningPoint toolbar, we're going to click on the Preferences button. And some of you may have played around in here before. And what we're going to do to pair the presenter card is on the left-hand side of different settings and options you can choose from, we're going to choose the Connections option. And as you scroll down, you're going to see a lot of different settings here for things like your receiver channel number and that type of stuff. We also have a section right here for presenter card. Now you'll see right now I don't currently have a presenter card paired to my computer. When you're ready to pair your card, all you have to do is make sure your presenter card is on the same channel as your receiver so that the two of them are talking. Click your change button, and TurningPoint simply tells you to press any button on your presenter card to pair it. As soon as you do that, you'll see your presenter card ID number appear here, and it'll be stored here now in your settings panel. From there, you're ready to go. You can start using your presenter card to go back and forth throughout your slides in your presentation. You'll also notice if you have a presenter card that there are three buttons in the center of it. Those are programmable to certain features within TurningPoint and Anywhere polling. So if you want to customize those buttons, it's entirely up to you. And you can do so in the presenter card section right below where we just paired the presenter card. So you just simply click this drop down and say to TurningPoint, I want button number 1 to toggle between percentages and count numbers now, if that's a feature that you tend to use a lot. Now, one tip here is that these settings store within TurningPoint on your computer. So if you get comfortable with a certain combination of 3 buttons that are programmed, and all of a sudden you go and pair your presenter card to a computer you don't normally use, your button programmings are going to be back to the default settings. Okay, so double check and just make sure if you're switching from computer to computer, your buttons are programmed to do what you are familiar with them doing. Okay? At any point, you can change the presenter card that's paired to the computer. So if you share presenter cards or if you share presentation computers or whatever the scenario might be within your organization, you can come in here at any time, click the change button, click the cleared paired device option, and then TurningPoint will allow you to pair a new presenter card to your computer. Okay, so a couple of extra steps involved, but we did sort of add that extra layer of pairing and security to prevent that scenario of a student walking in with a presenter card and controlling an instructor's presentation. Okay, I'm not going to go back into presentation mode for this next question because I need to be in my TurningPoint toolbar to go over these next things with you. So the next question here is, how do I change the channel on my equipment? There are any number of scenarios where you might need to do this. Think of a college or university campus where there could be multiple classrooms within the same building that all have a receiver plugged in. If all the classrooms were on the same channel and there were 3 instructors polling questions at the same time, with the radio frequency having a 200-foot range, as long as students were within 200 feet of those other receivers, it's going to become very unpredictable as to where the individual responses are going to go. So teacher A could get responses from classroom B or C. Okay, so by changing channels, you can avoid that whole situation. So for organizations that might have, 4 or 5 or 6 kits that you use, and maybe you have like a training center where you could have 2 or 3 training sessions going on at the same time, you may have experienced that issue before if you haven't changed the channels on your equipment. And so let's have a look at how to do that now. We're going to go back into the Preferences button on our TurningPoint toolbar. And now this is setting the channel for our receiver. Okay, I'm going to show you in a second how to do the keypads. We're going to go back to the Connections tab here in our settings where we paired our presenter card. And you'll see here response card channels. And any receiver you have plugged into your computer will show up here. To change the channel on your receiver, all you need to do is choose a new number from this drop-down. Okay, as you can see on my screen, it can be anything from channel 1 to channel 82. And so depending on your setup within your organization, you may consider having each kit on a separate channel number. And so if I wanted to change my receiver to channel 60, it's now changed to channel 60 from channel 72 that it was on. The receiver will remember this setting until you change it again. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the channel resetting if you unplug the receiver or restart the computer or anything like that. As far as the keypads go, let me pull up my document camera here and I will show you. We'll see how this works. It might be a little bit laggy for you guys on the webinar. Now, to change the channel, the keypad I have in my hand currently is just our standard response card RF. It does not have a display of any sort. So if I want to change the channel on this keypad, there's a channel button in the lower left corner. I'm going to push channel, 70, channel again. This keypad is now on channel 70. Just like my receiver, it's going to remember that channel setting until somebody changes it again. The LCD keypad model, exactly the same process. So I'm going to push channel, 70, channel again. And that will update the channel number to channel 70 on this keypad. Third device we'll have a look at here is our NXT. Some of you may have this one. Same idea with this device. However, the channel button is off to the left-hand side. So we're just going to push channel, 70, hit enter, and the keypad's now changed to channel 70. So again, as far as your channels go, they're going to stay memorized in your devices until somebody changes them again. You'll notice that it's fairly easy to change your channel numbers. Some of you may have found that your audience members change the channel numbers accidentally. And so you may periodically have the odd person where, out of everybody in your presentation, one person puts up their hand and says, hey, my keypad's not working. Chances are it's on the wrong channel number. So as long as you know the channel your receiver's on, like you saw there on the camera, it's very easy to just say, okay, can you do this for me? Let's try and see if we can get that working. 95% of the time, it's simply just a channel number issue. Okay, so that's how you're going to change your channel numbers on your devices. Let's have a look at our next question. What should I do if I forget to launch TurningPoint and I just open my presentation? We see this happen a lot more often than you would think. Everybody's habit that we've gotten into is when you want to launch your PowerPoint presentation, you plug your flash drive in, you browse to your network location, wherever your file is, you go to that spot and just double click it, right? The problem with doing it that way when you're working with an interactive presentation is that PowerPoint will not look at your presentation and say, oh, there's polling slides here. I need to go grab that TurningPoint add-in. So the key is that you want to make sure you always start out launching with your TurningPoint icon. Okay? That's going to pull up your dashboard and allow you to go into PowerPoint. Now, here's a couple of screenshots of your PowerPoint toolbars. It's very easy to tell once you get into your presentation before you launch it whether you remember to open TurningPoint or not. The top screenshot here is going to show you what it's going to look like with TurningPoint running. So you're going to have your TurningPoint toolbar listed there. The one on the bottom shows just a standard PowerPoint application that's running without TurningPoint launched. Okay? So you always want to check for that little TurningPoint tab at the end. If you forget to launch TurningPoint and you get into it and you realize, oops, you cannot launch TurningPoint while PowerPoint is running. Okay, so what you need to do at that point is close down your PowerPoint application, locate your TurningPoint icon on your desktop, double-click it, and select PowerPoint polling on your TurningPoint dashboard. Once you're in PowerPoint polling, it's business as usual. Simply click File, Open, and grab your presentation, and you're good to go. Okay, so a very common thing we see happen and a very easy thing to solve. If you have PowerPoint running and you try to launch TurningPoint, it will give you an error message letting you know that PowerPoint is currently running. Okay, so if you happen to see that message, double-click, check to make sure you don't have any PowerPoint application windows open along your Windows toolbar. here's one of my favorites. If I have a bunch of slides in my presentation, can I convert them to polling slides? This is a scenario that we see quite a bit. Whether you have guest presenters coming in where they're going to be using our technology and our software and maybe they don't have it installed, or maybe you have presentations that you've been using and now that you've got access to the TurningPoint software and hardware, you want to convert those into interactive polling slides. The good news is that you can do that relatively easily with your existing PowerPoint presentations. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you how that would work. Here I have an existing PowerPoint slide in a title text format. You'll see that there's no chart on this slide. My answer choices are not numbered or labeled in any way. So this is just strictly a standard PowerPoint slide. When I want to convert this to an interactive polling slide, all I have to do is on my TurningPoint toolbar, select my Objects menu, go to the Charts option, and then choose any one of these chart options that you find within that Objects menu. Now what's going to happen is you're going to see the chart appear on my slide. My answer choices are now labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3 in this situation, and this has now been converted to a TurningPoint polling slide, and I can poll this. So as you saw there, it's very easy to convert an existing PowerPoint slide to a polling slide. Okay. At this point, all we would need to do, save a copy of our presentation, and we will now have this polling slide within our presentation moving forward. Okay, let's just see here if we have any questions. Okay, let's have a look here. There is a question here, sometimes just relating to the last question there about not always launching TurningPoint. Sometimes TurningPoint gives an error that PowerPoint is open and therefore it can't open when PowerPoint is not actually running. What I found, I've seen that in my system personally, and generally what happens is in that scenario, if you hit Control-Alt-Delete and launch your task manager, if you look in the running processes, you'll generally see a PowerPoint.exe task that's actually stuck in the background, even though the application itself isn't running. And so just that task being stuck in the background is enough to make TurningPoint think that PowerPoint's running, right? Because it sees that program in memory. So in those situations, just do your standard Control-Alt-Delete, go to your Processes tab, look for PowerPoint and just select it and hit End Task. And once you do that, you should be able to launch TurningPoint normally. Great question. Okay, here's another one. This is a common question, and believe it or not, a lot of times we see, when we're testing presentations, a lot of our clients have these really, really nicely branded PowerPoint templates, like the one I'm using here today. It's got our bar along the bottom. It's got our logo in the bottom corner. And a lot of you guys probably have that exact same thing. And so you can use those templates with polling slides. Okay, the way TurningPoint works with your template is it uses your title text slide layout in your slide master. So for those of you that are familiar with that, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. For some of you, your marketing teams or other departments may put your presentations together for you or your templates together for you. And so in your slide master template, as long as you have a title text slide layout option that's branded with your corporate colors and logos and layouts and all that sort of thing, TurningPoint will grab that automatically for you. If by chance you're using a template and it has some default white slide layouts as well in it, if TurningPoint happens to grab one of those blank standard white templates, you can change to your branded template just by right-clicking on the slide, going to layout and choosing your branded slide layout that you want to use. Okay, and so you don't have to have your polling slides look like they're from a totally different presentation than the rest of your slide deck. Everything can look exactly the same. Everything can be branded the same. And so for those of you that have standards around, having to have logos in certain colors and things and fonts and that type of stuff, TurningPoint will work perfectly fine with those. Here's another question. PowerPoint polling. My version of PowerPoint polling looks completely different than the version that we currently have. Just on that topic, before I move on to the next thing here, there are currently two versions of TurningPoint. There's TurningPoint 2008, and then the one that I'm using today, which is the current version, is TurningPoint 5. So if any of you are still on TurningPoint 2008, the upgrade to version 5 is a totally free download from our website. So you just go to turningtechnologies.ca, go to the Downloads tab, and it'll just ask you to fill in your name, your organization, email, and some other information, and it'll give you the setup file to install TurningPoint 5. On that topic, presentations you've created in 2008 version of TurningPoint, when you open those for the first time in TurningPoint 5, it will ask if you want to convert it. Once it's been converted to TurningPoint 5's format, you cannot open it again in TurningPoint 2008. I shouldn't say you can't open it. You can open it. It's just your polling slides aren't going to function because the objects have been converted to the TurningPoint 5 format. So there's a couple things to keep in mind there as you move from one version to the next. Just kind of as a topic on another version of TurningPoint that's coming, we do have a version called TurningPoint Cloud that's going to be released in the next few days, and so that's going to add another version of TurningPoint to the mix. So to go from one version to the next, there's no charge for it. You do need to download it from our website. You will need IT to give you administrative rights to install it, but once it's installed, you're good to go as far as that goes. I have some questions that require participants to select more than a single answer option in order to be correct. How can I do this? So one of the new additions in TurningPoint 5 is the ability to tell TurningPoint the audience member needs to select more than one choice in order to be correct. So if you're grading your participants, if you're tracking responses and scores and things like that, you do now have the ability to build this sort of question. And let's just have a look here at how to do that. I have here just a regular multiple choice polling slide that I created ahead of time. And so this is an example of a question that has two correct answers that a participant would need to select in order to get the point for this question. Now, in order to configure this question to work that way, there's a couple things we need to do. First, just like any regular question with a correct answer, we need to let TurningPoint know which two answer choices are correct. So in my scenario, 2 and 4 are the two options that the participants are going to need to select. The next step we're going to need to do is we're going to need to click on the multiple responses checkbox here because we need to be able to take two options from each keypad. Next step is going to be to tell TurningPoint the response limit. So in my scenario, the default is 2. I've got 2 answers required, so I don't need to make any changes. If you had 3 correct answers the audience members had to choose, you would just simply change that drop down to match up accordingly. The final thing you're going to do is you're going to check off this box here for all or nothing scoring. That is the key. That's what tells TurningPoint in order for a participant to get graded correct on this question, they have to select 2 and 4. The order that they select them doesn't make a difference. They could push 2 and 4, they could push 4 and 2. As long as they push a combination of those buttons, they're good to go. Now, just like any other multiple choice question, participants can change their answer. So if I was an audience member answering this question and say I pushed 2 and 3, and then I realized, oh no, they don't have an office in Calgary, I think it's Montreal. To change my 2 answer selections, I would just re-enter my 2 choices. So I would say, oh no, I think it's 2 and 4, and so I would push 2 and 4. And that pushes out my 2 previous answers and makes 2 and 4 my new set of answers. Okay? The rest of it, TurningPoint will take care of behind the scenes in terms of scoring, points, and all that sort of thing. Yes, great. Question about TurningPoint Cloud. Can I elaborate on it towards the end of the session? Absolutely, I can. I can give you a couple of things that are going to be different and some changes that are coming. Absolutely. Demographic tracking. How many demographic assignment questions can I have in my presentation? I get this question a fair bit when I'm doing training sessions with clients, and I'm talking about our demographic tracking and assignment slides and that sort of thing. You can have as many demographic assignment slides as you like in your presentation, and kind of think of a demographic slide as a filter, right? The more demographic slides you have, the more ways you can filter your information through our reporting in the back end. So, for example, let's say I wanted to break my audience down into departments. I could build a slide into my presentation that says, what department are you from? And then let's say I wanted to have an additional slide that said, how many years have you been with the organization? If I set both of those up as a demographic assignment, what it will allow me to do is to look at my reports and say, how did the IT department answer questions versus the sales department? Or how did people who have been with the organization for less than 5 years answer versus people who have been with the organization for more than 5 years? It would also allow me to filter out responses based on, let's say, for example, people from the training department that have been with the organization for 5 or more years, and it would let me start to look at how that specific group of people responded to all my questions. So the more demographic assignment slides you have, the more filter options it's going to give you, the more ways it gives you to break your information down and compare it. The nice thing with your demographic slides, as some of you may know or you may have discovered, they don't have to be the very first thing that you ask at the beginning of your presentation. You can include them anywhere throughout your slide deck, and TurningPoint will give you demographic information for every single question throughout that presentation, whether they came before or after that assignment slide. Okay, so demographic tracking, very, very easy to set up, and it can give you a lot of different ways to look at your information. Question on the fly. This is always a good one. So one of the questions I received was, how can I create a question on the fly if I'm doing a session where there's group discussion going on, and maybe based on that group discussion, there's been 4 or 5 points that have come out, and I want to poll the audience on them, and I don't have a question that was pre-built ready to go. You do have the ability to do this at any time throughout your presentation, whether it's from a polling slide, so you could poll a question, and then based on the results, you might say, okay, let's poll another question. So you can do it immediately following a polling slide you already have. You can also do it from any standard PowerPoint presentation slide in your presentation as well. What you're going to do to create a question on the fly is, first, we're going to have to open up the TurningPoint toolbar here. To do that, when you're not on a polling slide, the default key combination is Control-8. Okay, so that lets you show or hide your TurningPoint toolbar at any point in your presentation. From the TurningPoint toolbar, there's a button here with a little drop-down arrow beside it, which is your question on the fly option. Now in here, you've got a bunch of quick options you can do. So if you just wanted to verbally ask a question and you didn't want to type everything in, you can just do a quick multiple choice 2, 3, 4, 5 answer option. It's not going to put your answer choices in there. It's just going to simply allow the audience to push 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 based on what you verbally asked them. If you would like to type something in, if you choose this custom option, it's going to allow you to do that. So I'm going to type my question. type my answer choices, just one answer per line. I don't need to do anything as far as separating them. And I'm just going to hit the insert button. What that's going to do is that's going to have TurningPoint drop that polling slide right into my presentation immediately following the slide I was just on. Okay, so very quick and easy way to do it if you're somebody that has a lot of sort of on-the-fly discussions in your presentation. The great thing is, when you're done your presentation, if you choose to save the PowerPoint file, this question will stay in that presentation. So if it's something you wanted to continue to use going forward, it's very easy to do that. You're just going to go File, Save. Okay, so that's the question on the fly feature. Okay, let's have a look at our next thing. What does the Convert to Picture Slide option do? That is a fantastic question as well. So some of you may be using this feature on a regular basis. A lot of you have probably seen it in the TurningPoint toolbar. But one of the things that TurningPoint can do is it can allow you to use images for answer options instead of words. And so I have this multiple choice slide up here on the screen that I created ahead of time. This is not the question on the fly slide. This is a different one that I had built. And you'll notice here I've got some images that I've just inserted. Now, as far as inserting the images on the slide, it's just standard PowerPoint functionality. So you're just going to go to your Insert menu, grab your pictures, grab your clip art, whatever you want to put onto the slide. That's all you've got to do. And then I'm just going to kind of place these on my slide here now that I've showed you what it looks like. Okay, and one of the things that I will pass along to you guys that are on the webinar here today is that a standard polling slide that you've created with TurningPoint, like a multiple choice slide or whatever the scenario might be, you can always go back and change them. So if you wanted to remove an answer choice, change an answer choice, add a couple new ones, it's all very, very easy to do. You just go back and type in your new choices. Your picture slide, once you create it, you can't modify it. So this slide here, for example, if I decided after I convert it to a picture slide, I want to change the motorcycle to a mountain bike, or I wanted to add a sixth option of, did you fly into work today on a plane? In order to do those sorts of things, I would have to create the slide again from scratch, starting with a regular multiple choice polling slide again. So one of the things that I like to recommend is, kind of start out with them set up sort of like I have here. As you're going through and building your presentation, build your multiple choice slide, put the pictures on it, but then don't convert it until you are 100% sure that that is in fact what you want on your picture slide. I personally find that it saves that hassle of having to create the slide a couple times to get it just right. So I thought I would pass that along to everybody on the call here today. Now, the next step when we're dealing with a picture slide is we obviously want our options 1, 2, 3, 4 to match up to the pictures in the same sequence as the text list does. And so the trick to doing that is you're going to hold on to the Control button on your keyboard, and you're just simply going to click the pictures in the order you want them to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, or A, B, C, D. And so that's telling TurningPoint the sequence that you want to use. Once you've done that, you just click your Tools menu, click Convert to Picture, and you'll see there that TurningPoint automatically removes my text list from the background and links 1, 2, 3, 4 to my images. As a participant, I'm going to answer this question just like any other multiple choice slide. The only difference is I'm answering based on the images that you're presenting me with. Okay? So that's how you're going to create a picture slide. Again, the key is hold on to the Control button and click them in the order you want them to be, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're good to go. Okay. From here, you can still do things like move them around. You can resize them and all that sort of thing. So that still works perfectly fine, just like it normally would. And so from here, we're just going to pull this question just like any other multiple choice slide. Okay, let's just see, here's a question. How does the picture answer option show up in the report afterwards? Great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. When you create your multiple choice question, when you type in your text answer options, whatever you put in as your text answers is what's going to appear in your reports. So just like I had car, bike, bus, walk, when I run a report on this question, that's what's going to show up. The pictures don't. So I've seen in the past where people just kind of put random letters and numbers in because they're going to use images, and then you kind of have to work backwards from the report to figure out what the pictures actually were. So keep that in mind. Have the text options relate to what the images are actually going to be. On the topic of text answer choices, something that just popped into my head that we do get asked from time to time is, can we have the text options also appear on the slide? You can. However, there is not an option in TurningPoint to just kind of, check off a box and say, show text options. And so you need to do that manually. So if you wanted to have the images along with the text on the slide, you can just insert regular PowerPoint text boxes underneath your images with your descriptive text in them. Okay, so it's as easy as that. It's a couple of manual steps, but absolutely you can have your text options display on the slide along with the images if you want to. Okay. Next topic is on team competitions. So there's a couple scenarios where this question comes up. There's the question of, if I just hand keypads out to my audience members, is there a way that I can break them into teams? There's also the part of it, if I'm using a participant list and I decide that I want to break them into teams, can I do it that way as well? And so there's kind of two ways that you can break your audience into teams for competitions or games. You can do it through the participant list, and I'm going to show you guys how to build a participant list in a little bit. You can also do it through the competition features that are built into TurningPoint. So to do it with a team assignment slide, what we're going to do is on the TurningPoint toolbar, we have a compete menu. So all the competition stuff is grouped in that menu. So your team assignment slide, your leaderboard slides, and your wager slide. So if we just had a session where we're using a participant list, or we've just handed keypads out to people and we want them to compete, if we place a team assignment slide in the presentation, that will allow the participants to assign themselves to a team. So keep in mind, doing it this way, you don't necessarily have 100% control over who goes on what team. So I'm just going to build a quick team assignment slide here. Okay, and let's just say we wanted to have a red, green, and blue team. Okay, that is all we need to do as far as a team assignment slide. What's going to happen now is sort of like with a demographic assignment slide. When the keypad says, I want to be on the red team, TurningPoint reads the keypad ID from that keypad and says, okay, device 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to be on the red team. And so that's how it's going to track all of them. Now, when it comes to this sort of scenario, obviously it's going to be very difficult to make sure all the teams turn out with equal number of players. The great news is that TurningPoint averages the team scores. So if there is a team that, say, has 10 players and another team that has 8 players, the team with the couple extra people on it, there's no sort of unfair advantage happening there because TurningPoint is just going to end up averaging the points that they're gathering anyway. So as far as breaking your participants into a team, that's all you need to do. So whether it's colors, whether it's table numbers, whether you want to, one of the other things that you could do is, instead of doing a demographic assignment, you could do a team assignment slide and say, let's compete by departments. And your team names are IT, HR, training, sales. And what a team assignment slide will actually do is also function as a demographic assignment. So by doing it that way, you're kind of accomplishing two things, right? You're going to be able to see how each department answered your questions, but then you're also going to be able to have each department compete as teams in your presentation. So you can kind of be strategic with the way you set some of these things up to kind of accomplish two things with one slide type. Now, from the competition point of view, obviously we need to be able to do things like assign points, right? So that's the part that kind of goes along with the whole competition aspect. So your point assignment is based on questions that are going to have correct and incorrect answers. So on the preferences panel here, once you have set a correct answer, you can also set your correct point value. So each question can have a different number of points that you're going to give. So you could have each round have an increasing amount that they're going to receive. You can also deduct points for incorrect responses if you want to. It's totally up to you. The way this is now configured is anybody that gets this question correct is going to get 100 points towards their team score. Okay? From here, it's simply a matter of putting in the different leaderboards that you want to display throughout your presentation. So I'll just kind of go over some of the different options that are available here. The key with these leaderboards is to not type anything in them or delete anything out of them. TurningPoint will automatically populate these with data when you're in your presentation. So the different ways you can look at scores. You can show them based on individual participants. So if you have a participant list loaded, it'll show names, the number of points each person has. If TurningPoint's running in auto mode, which is the default way that it runs, it will show keypad ID numbers here. So you can still identify the person that has the highest score if you wanted to hand out a prize or identify that person somehow. Your team scoreboard is simply going to grab the team names from your team assignment slide, populate them in here, and show what the team scores are. Team MVP will show the keypad or participant that has the highest score on each individual team. And your fastest responder slide is going to show who answered the last question that had a correct answer correctly, but also the fastest. So if somebody is fast, but they're wrong, they're not going to appear on this slide. Okay. Now, with the scoreboards, with these leaderboard slides, you can place them throughout your presentation as many times as you want, and they will always show the total accumulated score up to that point in your presentation. The only one that works a little bit different is the fastest responder slide. That one always shows the response time to the last question that had a correct answer indicator. It doesn't do a total accumulated amount of time across the entire presentation. Okay, so that's how you would set up a basic team competition within your presentation. Okay, moment-to-moment slide. How do I use it? It's a feature that's in TurningPoint that it gets used occasionally, but not a lot of people necessarily know about it. It's found in the New dropdown. It's the very bottom option. And we see this used with focus groups quite a bit because what it's going to do is, let's just say you were facilitating a session and you wanted to air a new radio commercial that you were thinking of putting on air. And you had a focus group and you were asking them, okay, you know, as you're listening to this commercial or as you're watching this commercial, you know, push 1 through 5 depending on, you know, whether you don't find it appealing or whether you are really engaged in what you're hearing. And essentially what you end up with is a little ticker that's going to move up and down, and it timestamps everything. And so it's not necessarily something that you would show to the audience. It's more, you know, you as the facilitator are going to watch this on your screen. And essentially what it's going to allow you to do is go back and say, okay, you know, at the 15-second mark in that commercial or in that radio spot, everybody's attention really dropped off, or their attitude about it, you know, became really negative. It allows you to kind of match those timestamps up. So now you can go and say, okay, whatever happened to that 15-second mark or 2-minute mark, the audience didn't like, so let's evaluate that. So that's what the moment-to-moment slide is going to let you do, and kind of the idea behind, sort of what it does and how it works. What is conditional branching and how does it work? This is a little-known feature that's in TurningPoint. Some of you might have seen it in the menu. A lot of people, until I show it to them, they don't necessarily know that it's something that TurningPoint can do. Conditional branching allows you to build or create rules within one of your polling slides. So if I take this question here as an example, how much do you know about TurningPoint? And let's say I wanted to have this at the very beginning of one of my on-site workshops that I do. And I said, okay, how much do you guys know? Do you feel like you know nothing at all? Do you know a little bit? Or do you feel like you're a pro? I can actually create rules in this that says, okay, TurningPoint, if majority of my participants say they don't know anything at all about TurningPoint, start at the beginning. I want to start with the basics and work my way up. If they say they know a little bit, let's jump to slide number 10 because maybe I don't need to cover that very basic introduction. And you know what? If everybody says they're a pro, let's jump to the very last section of the presentation because that's the stuff that these guys are going to be really interested in, right? I don't want to bore these guys with 45 minutes of things that they already know. So you can do this by setting up these conditional branching rules within TurningPoint. To set up conditional branching, you're going to find it under your Tools menu. And it's listed right here, conditional branching. And so, setting them up, think of it kind of like setting up rules in your Outlook mail program. First thing we're going to do is we're going to select the question that we want to create the rules on. Next, we're going to add rules. Generally, what I do is I name my rules to match my answer choices. So if I need to change anything or if a rule's not quite working properly, it's very easy to go back and troubleshoot and change things if I need to. And so from this point, all we have to do is start setting up the options down here at the bottom. And you'll see that they're underlined in blue, and you can click on them. So first thing I'm going to do is set the condition. So I can do a certain percentage, a certain number, or if majority rules. TurningPoint says, okay, if majority rules on what answer choice? So I'm setting this up for the option of I don't know anything at all. Second step is to tell TurningPoint what slide number in your presentation you want to jump to. So maybe I want to jump to slide number 36 if majority of the audience picks the option of nothing. Okay? And you're just simply going to do that for each of your answer options on this slide. Okay. One of the things that I always recommend to keep in mind is if a rule does not get triggered, TurningPoint will just move on to the next slide in your presentation. So if you forget to set up a rule and majority of the people pick that option that does not have a rule, it's just going to move on to the next thing. If you had a 50-50 split, so if you had a yes-no option and it was 50-50, again, because majority doesn't rule on either one of those two options, TurningPoint's going to say, okay, there's a tie, I just move on to the next thing. So keep that in mind and build a buffer in there accordingly to kind of handle those sort of situations. Other than that, TurningPoint is going to handle jumping to whatever slide number you've set up based on the rules that you've created on that particular question slide. Okay, so with conditional branching, what happens if you advance or go back in your deck? Does it confuse anything? If a rule gets triggered, all it simply does is it just jumps to that point in your presentation. As the facilitator, you still have the ability to manually jump to anywhere else in your presentation. If I pulled this question once and everybody said, oh, I'm a pro, and we jumped to the end of the presentation, I could come back and re-pull this question again, and then if majority picked option number 2, it'll trigger that rule instead and jump to that point in my presentation. So going back and forth or manually going from slide to slide, it doesn't affect the actual rule. The rule is triggered based on how the audience responds to this question and what rule gets triggered based on how they answered. Okay, here's something that we see a lot. PowerPoint prompts you to save your presentation every time you close it. It's fairly standard procedure. Anytime you open a presentation that has polling slides in it and you run those slides, because your charts have changed, you know, the state of them is different than when you originally opened it, that's enough that triggers PowerPoint to say there's something different here. Do I want to change it? And so as long as you're saving your session data through your TurningPoint toolbar, the actual PowerPoint presentation, you don't need to worry about saving. You can just tell it not to save your PowerPoint file. As long as you're hitting Save Session on your TurningPoint toolbar, that is the main thing that you're concerned about in terms of reporting and things down the road. So no, you don't have to save the PowerPoint file. If you save it, you just have to remember to reset your session next time you use it. But it's not going to negatively affect anything one way or the other. Okay, sometimes my countdown clock works, and other times it doesn't. What's causing it to happen? Generally, what causes this is not resetting your session before you start your presentation. So back to that previous question, if at the end of your presentation you save it, and then you open it up again and use it with another group the following day, if you don't reset your presentation, what's going to happen is once those countdown timers have been run with TurningPoint, they don't come back until you reset. So you want to make sure that you use your reset drop down here and choose the option to reset your session. What that'll do is it will, if you've got 30-second countdown timers, it'll reset all of those back to 30 seconds for you. Okay, and having a few issues with correct answer indicators showing up before charts. Again, a very common thing that we see. Typically what causes this is, I've got an example here with this particular question. As some of you may or may not know, TurningPoint actually uses the PowerPoint animation system in order to function. And so the challenge becomes, if any of your TurningPoint animations get out of sequence, it causes things like answer indicators to appear before polling closes or before the charts. So if I look at my animation pane, just my standard PowerPoint animation pane, you're going to see that I've got a correct answer indicator animation and a TP chart animation. Right now, the way these are set up, if I close polling, what's going to happen is the answer indicator is going to show up first, and then polling is going to close, and then the chart's going to appear. So you want to make sure that everything stays in the proper order. When you build a multiple choice polling slide and add a correct answer indicator, TurningPoint puts these things in sequence for you automatically, so you don't generally need to worry about it. You just have to watch if you start adding custom animations like animating your question or your answer choices. You really want to make sure that these TurningPoint objects stay in the proper order. Okay, 9 times out of 10, that is exactly what causes that problem. Okay, let's just see if we have a couple other questions here. Okay, been resetting my session, but still had some issues with countdown timers. Okay. What I'll do, I'll get in touch with you after the session, and we can kind of troubleshoot that and see what might be causing it. Okay. There were a couple other questions. That kind of gets through the bulk of what I wanted to go over with you guys. That kind of wraps us up to our 2 o'clock hour. Any questions that were submitted through the chat that I did not get a chance to answer live today, what I'll do is I will answer those questions and put together a PDF and send that out after the webinar. This webinar was also recorded, so I'll make sure I share all that information with everybody. There's all my contact information directly, our technical support information as well. And just on that topic of the TurningPoint cloud version that's coming out, big differences between the two, TurningPoint 5 and the cloud version. The cloud version is going to start moving towards more of obviously a cloud sort of platform with security and things built into it. So from a security perspective, a presenter is going to have their own presenter account that keeps their participant lists secure, session data secure, and so that's kind of the idea behind it to sort of start out with. The long-term plan is that parts of it are going to start moving to be cloud-based. So things like session data. Instead of storing your session data locally on your computer, you'll have the option to push that data to your cloud account, which is going to make sharing it with colleagues or other people a lot easier. Same with accessing participant lists and things like that. So that version of TurningPoint, with that said, I believe it's going to be released towards the end of this week. For anybody on the call today that uses ResponseWare, you probably saw the notice that was sent out the other day as well. There is also an overhaul for ResponseWare that's being pushed out this weekend too. So between the new version of TurningPoint, the big update for ResponseWare, our new QT device that's coming out with the full BlackBerry style keyboard on it. There's some really exciting stuff happening over the next few weeks. So, stay tuned. Watch our website. Once that cloud version of TurningPoint's out, we'll be doing sort of a webinar on TurningPoint 5 versus the cloud version and sort of what the differences are and security and things like that. So stay tuned. We'll send out an email with that information for everybody, and we hope to see you on those future webinars. So with that said, we'll wrap up here at 2 o'clock. I hope you guys found this session informative. I hope everybody learned at least one thing new today. And as always, if you do have any questions following the webinar, if you run into any challenges, always feel free to reach out and contact any one of us here at the office. Thank you very much, everybody, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.